The sun, a relentless hammer, beat down on Onitsha's main market. From the crack of dawn, the place roared to life, a chaotic symphony of vendors hawking their wares. The air, thick and heavy, buzzed with 1,000 different smells. Fried akara, sizzling in large pans, sent up plumes of fragrant smoke. Heaps of spices, their colors vibrant and pungent, filled woven baskets. Stacks of brightly patterned cloth, imported from distant lands, shimmered under the harsh light. The market was a living, breathing thing, a world unto itself. Vendors, their voices hoarse from hours of shouting, called out to passers-by. Come see, best prices in Onitsha. Fine cloth like silk. Touch it, feel it. Cars and trucks, loaded to the brim with goods, honked their way through the narrow lanes, adding to the din. Customers, their faces etched with the strain of bargaining, haggled over prices, their voices rising and falling in the rhythm of the market. In the midst of this chaos, Chief Obina Okeite's stall stood out. It was a corner stall, large and well-organized, filled with fine cloth and imported goods. Obina himself was a man of quiet power. He moved with a confident grace, his smile warm and welcoming. He knew everyone and everyone knew him. People said he had the touch, that everything he touched turned to money. They envied his success, his fine clothes, his easy charm. Chidi, a young man with wide, observant eyes, worked as Obina's apprentice. He had come to Onitsha from a small village, a place where life was a constant struggle against poverty. He had dreams of his own stall, of escaping the endless cycle of hardship. He watched Obina closely, trying to learn the secrets of his success. But something about Obina made Chidi uneasy. It wasn't just the man's wealth or his smooth charm. It was something else, something he couldn't quite put his finger on. Sometimes, Obina's eyes would gleam with a strange light, a knowing look that made Chidi's skin crawl. He spoke of investments in hushed tones, his voice laced with a strange intensity. And there were the whispers, the rumors that swirled around the market like dust devils. People talked about the Okeite, a large, ornate pot that was said to bring wealth. They spoke of men who had become rich too quickly, their fortunes built on deals that were not right. They said these men made offerings, sacrifices to the Okeite, to appease the spirits that dwelled within it. Chidi tried to ignore the rumors. He was a hard worker, eager to learn the trade. He didn't want to get involved in anything dark or dangerous. But the market was changing. The usual noise was still there, the shouts of the vendors, the honking of the cars. But underneath it all, there was a quiet fear. Children were disappearing. Small children, snatched from the edges of the market, their faces fading from the colorful murals that adorned the walls. Their absence left a hollow space, a quiet dread that settled over the market like a heavy blanket. People whispered about curses, about angry spirits, about the price of wealth. Amaka, another apprentice, worked for Sir Chukuma, a man who dealt in motor spare parts. Amaka was a nervous, jittery young man, always looking over his shoulder. He warned Chidi to be careful, to stay away from the men who got rich too fast. They control things, he said, his voice trembling. Things you don't want to know about, things that are not of this world. Chidi didn't know what to believe. He wanted to dismiss Amaka's warnings as the ramblings of a scared man. But the fear in Amaka's eyes was real, and the rumors about the Okeite were growing louder, more insistent. The market, once a place of vibrant life, was now shrouded in a growing darkness, a shadow that stretched from the corners of the stalls to the deepest recesses of Chidi's heart. The market, usually a riot of sound and light, had settled into an unsettling stillness. The last vendors had packed their wares, the last customers had drifted away, leaving only the faint hum of distant generators and the rustle of stray papers in the night breeze. Chidi, his hands still stained with the day's grime, lingered at Obina's stall, pretending to tidy up. He watched as Obina moved with a strange, hurried purpose, his usual calm replaced by a tense energy. Obina locked the heavy metal doors of his stall, the sharp click echoing in the quiet market. He glanced around, his eyes darting into the shadows, as if checking for unseen observers. Then he slipped into a narrow alleyway, a dark gash in the maze of stalls. Chidi's heart pounded in his chest. He didn't know why, but he felt compelled to follow. The alleyway was a labyrinth of shadows, the dim moonlight barely penetrating the overhanging roofs. Chidi moved silently, his footsteps muffled by the loose sand and debris. He kept his distance, staying hidden in the deeper shadows, his eyes fixed on Obina's retreating figure. The alley opened into a deserted courtyard, surrounded by the crumbling walls of an old warehouse. The building loomed in the darkness, its broken windows like empty eyes staring out at the night. Obina went inside, the creak of the rusted door echoing in the silence. Chidi hesitated, a cold dread washing over him. But the need to know, to understand the darkness that had settled over the market, drove him forward. He crept towards the warehouse, his breath catching in his throat. He peered through a crack in the boarded-up windows, his eyes struggling to adjust to the dim light inside. The scene that unfolded before him was like something out of a nightmare. Obina stood with Sir Chukwuma and Kenechukwu, their faces illuminated by the eerie glow of a large, ornate pot in the center of the room. The Okeite, it pulsed with a dark, red light, casting long, distorted shadows that danced on the crumbling walls. Strange symbols, etched into the dirt floor around the pot, glowed with an unsettling energy. The air was thick and heavy, charged with a strange, palpable tension. The men chanted in a low, guttural voice, their words a strange, hypnotic rhythm. Chidi's stomach churned as he watched the dark, swirling mass within the Okeite. It moved like smoke, but it had a form, a shape that seemed to writhe and pulse with an unnatural life. Then he saw it, a small bundle, wrapped in cloth, lying near the edge of the pot. It was small, too small to be anything but a baby. A wave of nausea washed over Chidi. He knew what they were doing. He had heard the rumors, the whispers about blood sacrifices, but he had never believed them. Now he was witnessing it with his own eyes. They were offering a life, a child's life, to the Okeite. They were paying for their wealth with the blood of the innocent. A cold terror gripped Chidi. He wanted to scream, to run, to escape the horror of what he was seeing. But he was frozen, trapped in the darkness, forced to witness the unspeakable ritual. The men's chanting grew louder, their voices rising in a feverish crescendo. The dark mass in the Okeite pulsed and swelled, its red light growing brighter, more intense. Chidi's head swam, the air thick with a strange, oppressive energy. He stumbled back from the window, his breath coming in ragged gasps. He turned and ran, his feet pounding on the rough ground, his heart pounding in his chest. He ran through the dark alleys, away from the warehouse, away from the Okeite, away from the horror he had witnessed. He ran until he reached his small room, his sanctuary, but even there, the images haunted him. The red light of the Okeite, the small bundle, the men's chanting voices, they echoed in his mind, a dark and terrifying symphony. He couldn't sleep. He lay awake, his eyes wide with fear, the darkness of the market seeping into his soul. The vibrant energy of Onitsha's main market, once a source of pride and livelihood, began to wither. The relentless hum of commerce, the lively banter of traders, the cheerful calls of customers, all seemed to fade, replaced by a heavy, oppressive silence. A sense of unease settled over the market, a tangible dread that clung to the air like the thick, humid heat. Sales plummeted. Stalls that had once been bustling with activity stood empty, their owners staring into space, their faces etched with worry. Traders argued amongst themselves, their voices sharp and filled with suspicion. The usual friendly competition turned into bitter rivalry, fueled by fear and desperation. The market, once a symbol of prosperity, was now a breeding ground for anxiety and mistrust. The disappearances of the children cast a long shadow over the market. Mothers held their children close, their eyes filled with fear. Fathers patrolled the market's edges, their faces grim. The colorful murals, once a source of joy, now seemed to mock the emptiness left by the missing children. The joy had been stolen from the marketplace. Amaka Okoye, her notepad filled with scribbled notes and her eyes burning with determination, moved through the market like a storm. She was a young journalist, driven by a fierce sense of justice. She interviewed traders, questioned police officers, and followed every lead, no matter how faint. She wrote articles about the missing children, about the sudden wealth of certain traders, about the strange rumors that swirled around the market. Her articles, printed in the Anambra Herald, sparked fear and outrage, but they also ignited a spark of hope. She found people were scared to speak, but when she showed them her notepad and explained that she was trying to help, they would whisper. They spoke of odd noises at night, and of seeing men go into the abandoned warehouse. They also spoke of the Okeite. Amaka began to understand that the disappearances and the wealth were connected to this object. Pastor Chidi Okoro, a man of quiet strength and unwavering faith, walked through the market with a heavy heart. He saw the fear in people's eyes, the despair that clung to their souls. He spoke to them about the dangers of greed, about the ancient evils that lurked in the shadows. He warned them about the Okeite, calling it a thing of darkness, a vessel for spirits that demanded a terrible price. He preached about the power of faith, about the need to turn away from the darkness and embrace the light. He knew that the problem was not just flesh and blood, but something greater. Adaora Onitsha, her once vibrant face now pale and drawn, lived a nightmare. Her husband, Kenechukwu, had changed. The man she had married, the man she loved, was gone, replaced by a cold, distant stranger. He had money, more money than they had ever dreamed of, but he was not happy. His eyes were haunted, his touch was cold, and he spoke in whispers, in a language she didn't understand. She found strange symbols hidden in their home, symbols that matched the ones Chidi had seen in the warehouse. She overheard him talking in his sleep, his voice filled with fear and desperation. She knew that something was wrong, terribly wrong. The loss of her firstborn son haunted her. They told her it was a sudden illness, a tragic accident, but she didn't believe them. She felt a deep, primal sense of loss, a feeling that her child had been taken, sacrificed. She suspected Kenechukwu had paid the price of his wealth with their son's life. She sought out Pastor Okoro, her voice trembling as she recounted her fears. She told him about the symbols, about Kenechukwu's strange behavior, about the overwhelming sense of dread that filled her home. She begged him for help, for answers, for a way to escape the darkness that had consumed her life. Chidi, burdened by the terrible secret he carried, found himself drawn to Amaka and Pastor Okoro. He told Amaka everything he had seen, everything he knew. He described the ritual, the Okeite, the small, lifeless bundle. He shared his fear, his horror, his desperate need for justice. Amaka wrote it all down, her face grim. She knew that what Chidi had witnessed was not just a crime, but a terrible evil. The market, once a symbol of hope and prosperity, was now a battleground between light and darkness. The traders, the customers, the children, they were all trapped in the shadows, waiting for someone to lead them into the light. The night hung heavy and still, the moon a sliver of silver in the inky sky. A tense silence settled over the abandoned warehouse, a silence broken only by the rhythmic chanting emanating from within. Chidi, his heart pounding like a drum, led the small group. Amaka, her camera clutched in her hand, her eyes filled with a fierce determination. Pastor Chidi Okoro, his face set in a grim mask, his voice a low, steady prayer, and Adaora, her hands trembling, her eyes filled with a desperate resolve. They approached the warehouse, the air thick with an oppressive energy. They could feel the darkness emanating from within, a palpable force that seemed to push them back. Chidi pushed open the creaking door, and they stepped into the dim, red glow. The scene before them was a grotesque parody of a religious ceremony. The men, Obina, Sirchakuma, and Kenechukwu, stood around the Okeite, their faces contorted in a dark concentration. The pot pulsed with a malevolent red light, casting long, distorted shadows that danced on the crumbling walls. Another small child, bound and gagged, lay near the edge of the pot, a sacrifice waiting to be consumed. "Stop!" Chidi's voice, though trembling, echoed through the warehouse, cutting through the chanting. "You can't do this." The men turned, their faces twisted with rage and fear. They snarled at Chidi, their eyes burning with a dark intensity. They tried to continue the ritual, their voices rising in a desperate attempt to drown out Chidi's words. "This ends now." Amaka stepped forward, her camera rolling, capturing the horrifying scene. "The world will see what you've done." Pastor Okoro raised his hands, his voice a powerful force against the darkness. He spoke in ancient tongues, prayers of banishment, pleas for divine intervention. His voice resonated through the warehouse, clashing with the men's chanting. The Okeite reacted to the pastor's words. The dark, swirling mass within the pot began to writhe and churn, its red light growing brighter, more intense. The air crackled with energy, a tangible force that pressed against them, trying to push them back. The men tried to control the Okeite, to command the spirits within it, but they had lost their grip. The spirits, enraged by the interruption, began to rebel. The dark mass within the pot erupted, forming into grotesque shapes, with eyes that burned like embers and teeth that gleamed like shards of glass. The warehouse shook, the ground trembling beneath their feet. The walls groaned and cracked, as if the building itself was struggling against the force of the spirits. The men cried out in terror, their voices filled with fear and desperation. They were no longer the masters, but the victims of the very forces they had summoned. The EFCC agents, alerted by Chidi's information, stormed the warehouse, their weapons drawn. But their bullets were useless against the supernatural forces that raged within. The spirits, unbound and enraged, turned on the men, their forms twisting and contorting into nightmarish shapes. The men screamed, their voices echoing through the warehouse, a chorus of terror and despair. They were dragged into the Okeite, their bodies consumed by the dark mass, their screams swallowed by the red light. The Okeite pulsed, then went dark, the red light fading into a cold, empty blackness. The warehouse fell silent, the air thick with the residue of dark magic. The spirits were gone, banished, or so it seemed, to a realm beyond the reach of human eyes. The Okeite, now empty, stood silent, a dark monument to the greed and corruption that had consumed the market. The police arrested every person that had been at the warehouse. The child was taken to a hospital. Ada cried for the child, and for her lost son. The market was quiet, as if it was holding its breath. The heavy dread that had been there was gone. The air felt clean. The immediate aftermath of the warehouse confrontation was a strange, unsettling quiet. The cacophony that usually defined Onitsha's main market was replaced by a hushed stillness, as if the very air held its breath. The red glow of the Okeite was gone. The dark magic dissipated, but the residue of fear and horror lingered, a faint, metallic tang in the air. The police, their faces grim, worked tirelessly, cataloging the strange symbols, the remnants of the ritual, the empty, hollow shell of the Okeite. The EFCC agents, their initial shock replaced by a grim determination, meticulously gathered evidence, their reports filled with words that seemed to belong to another world. The news spread like wildfire, carried by the frantic whispers of traders and the bold headlines of Amaka's articles. The stories of the Okeite, the blood sacrifices, the dark rituals, were met with a mixture of disbelief and horrified fascination. People who had dismissed the rumors as superstition were forced to confront the chilling reality. Amaka's articles, detailing the men's crimes and the supernatural forces they had wielded, became a sensation. People read them with a mix of fear and anger, their voices rising in a chorus of outrage. The market, once a symbol of prosperity and community, was now a symbol of corruption and evil. There were protests, people demanded answers, and people demanded justice. Ada, her eyes filled with a weary sadness, cradled the rescued child, a fragile symbol of hope amidst the darkness. She wept for her lost son, for the innocent lives that had been sacrificed to the Okeite's insatiable hunger. She knew that her life would never be the same, that the scars of her husband's betrayal would forever mark her soul. She chose to leave Onitsha, to start a new life away from the market's tainted shadows, taking the rescued child with her. Chidi, his face etched with the weight of what he had witnessed, found himself thrust into an unexpected role. He was no longer just an apprentice, a young man trying to make a living. He was a symbol of hope, a voice of truth. He opened his own stall, a small, simple space amidst the lingering chaos of the market. He sold cloth like Obina had, but he did it honestly, with integrity. He wanted to show people that it was possible to build a life, to achieve success, without resorting to dark bargains. Pastor Chikadili Okoro remained in the market, a quiet presence amidst the lingering fear. He spoke to the traders, to the customers, to anyone who would listen. He reminded them of the power of faith, of the importance of choosing light over darkness. He warned them that the Okeite's influence, though diminished, might not be entirely gone. Some things, he said, leave echoes, faint whispers in the shadows, waiting for the right moment to return. The market slowly began to heal, to regain its rhythm. The stalls reopened, the vendors returned, the customers came back, drawn by the promise of honest trade and a renewed sense of community. But the memory of the Okeite, the horror of the rituals, lingered in the air, a subtle unease that refused to dissipate entirely. Years passed and the market changed. New traders arrived, young and ambitious, their eyes filled with the same dreams that had once filled Chidi's. They heard stories of the Okeite, of the men who had dared to bargain with dark forces. They saw the lingering shadows, the subtle unease that still clung to the corners of the market, and they wondered. They looked at the older traders, at the ones whose wealth seemed to grow too quickly, at the ones whose eyes held a strange, knowing gleam. They wondered if the Okeite was truly gone, or if it was merely dormant, waiting for a new generation to succumb to its dark allure. The market, they realized, was not just a place of commerce. It was a battleground, a place where light and darkness constantly clashed, where the price of wealth was always a question hanging in the air.